We've said it over and over. The San Francisco Giants have a hugely important offseason ahead of them, and one of the players who could end up being in headlines is Shohei Ohtani. Are the Angels going to trade him? And if they do, what are the realistic chances that the Giants could get involved? We'll get to that question and many others next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, we're going to get to some more mailbag questions. Thank you so much to everyone who submits questions on Twitter. We did these on Monday, and these are left over from then. Just a lot more to get to. Uncle D says, shots at getting Ohtani. So I get a lot of questions about Shohei Ohtani. I've kind of stirred the pot a little bit here, and there was some confusion. Some people have kind of tweeted at me about this, and I just want to clarify. So there was this report, I mean, it's just true. The Angels and Shohei Ohtani agreed to a $30 million contract for 2023, avoiding arbitration. But this doesn't mean anything, really, because he was arbitration eligible. They were eventually going to have to settle on his salary for 2023, and this is just them reaching an agreement a little bit early in the process, very early in the process, but eventually they were going to reach an agreement on his salary for next year. Otherwise, you have to. So there is no otherwise. Otherwise, they would be breaking the rules of the game. You have to establish a salary. He was just one of these arbitration eligible players. The point is he's entering his last year of team control. So this is his last year of arbitration, and then after 2023, he is set to reach free agency. Shohei Ohtani is 28 years old. He just turned 28 in July. So when the question is shots at getting Ohtani, this is kind of like, it's like the Juan Soto situation, but even more realistic than it would have been entering the year with Juan Soto. It's like nobody was talking about Juan Soto getting dealt when we entered 2022, but it ended up happening. And this is kind of what I'm saying when I'm talking about Shohei Ohtani and his status on the Angels, is that this isn't getting a ton of attention at this point in time, but all it takes is one little report that the Angels are listening on Shohei Ohtani, or the Angels, are going to trade him this winter if they can't extend him. Which, to me, if you're running the Angels, obviously number one goal should be to try to extend Shohei Ohtani. That's not what they did with this $30 million deal. That was just simply avoiding arbitration. Extending him means buying out free agent years. And from all indications are that they've made efforts and that there doesn't seem to be any traction whatsoever. And that he wants to play for a winner, or he doesn't want to sign on for many years for the Angels, who have proven that they can't win with him and with Mike Trout for years and years and years here. And so that's the situation. And so shots at getting Ohtani. The first thing that needs to happen is that we need to hear that the Angels are willing to move him, because while it may be the right thing to do, it doesn't mean it's what they're going to do. Their owner is very pro-star player, and they get a lot of benefits from having Shohei Ohtani on their team. But in reality, when they really take a cold, hard look at themselves as an organization, they have to understand, if we cannot extend Shohei Ohtani, then really the right thing to do would be to trade him. Otherwise, you risk, basically, he'll reach free agency, you'll give him the qualifying offer, he'll reject it, and then he'll sign elsewhere, and you'll really get almost nothing in return. Whereas if you trade him now in this offseason, you're still going to get a attractive package. But so that needs to happen first. They need to be willing to deal him. And then once they're willing to deal him, there's going to be 29 teams that want Shohei Ohtani. Maybe some teams wouldn't be able to pay the $30 million, but that certainly doesn't apply to the Giants. we talked about their payroll status. They're in a flexible position. Even if they keep having a modest or even relatively low payroll of around $160 million, still gives them about $60 million that they could spend this offseason just to get back to that level. And Shohei Ohtani will be making $30 million. So that would be about half the budget right there. Hopefully that's not actually their payroll figure, about $160 million. Hopefully it climbs closer to $200 million or even beyond. That's just a hope. I'm not saying how realistic that is, but you could certainly add a Shohei Ohtani. And when you talk about wanting athleticism and relative youth, he certainly brings that on the mound. It would be that, he would solve the issue of they need a starter to perhaps replace or bring back Rodon. Plus, they need some hitters, and Ohtani does both. The one thing he doesn't do is play a defensive position. I get it. He's a pitcher when he's pitching, but when he's not pitching, he's just DHing. So that's the one knock on Shohei Ohtani. But so the shots at getting him are low. They're low for every team. And if the Angels decide to trade him, which is a question in and of itself, then you're going to have fierce competition. And also, I'm just not sure the Giants, much like with Juan Soto, are in a position to deplete their farm system to bring in somebody on a short-term deal. So the only way it would really work for the Giants is if they could extend Shohei Ohtani after trading for him. So if you had to give up maybe one of Marco Luciano or Kyle Harrison, and you can get Shohei Ohtani and extend him, you definitely consider doing that. And the fact is, Ohtani, as great as he is, would cost significantly less than what Juan Soto cost, because Juan Soto came with 2.5 years of club control, whereas Ohtani comes with just 1 year remaining. That was the status of Mookie Betts when he was traded to the Dodgers. And a lot of people complain that deal, Dodgers didn't give up all that much to get Mookie Betts. And this is exactly why. Because Mookie Betts was only under club control for 1 more season. So the cost goes down, the less control you have over the player. You're getting them for less time, so you give up less, is the reality. And then the Dodgers extended Mookie Betts before they even played a game in 2020. So that would be the hope. But the shot, I wouldn't say, put your money on this. It's going to happen. It's certainly a long shot, but it is something to certainly pay attention to as the offseason unfolds. So coming up next, a lot more questions and answers. We're going to talk about how do the Giants fix their bullpen, which was such an issue last year, and how is their money best spent this winter. We'll get into all of that momentarily. But first, I really think dress shirts are one of the more annoying articles of clothing we have to wear. They're uncomfortable. When you need to do some activity, you certainly can't shoot some hoops or go golfing in these stiff, uncomfortable dress shirts. The dress shirt was due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter shirt is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible shirt known to man, and here's why. Rhone's comfortable 4-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work to your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident that a wrinkle-free shirt without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the shirt. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. Another huge annoyance of standard dress shirts. The commuter shirt can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to Rhone.com/lockedon and use promo code LOCKEDON to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/lockedon and use code LOCKEDON. It's time to find your corner office comfort. Upgrade your closet with Rhone and use LOCKEDON to save 20% at Rhone.com/lockedon. All right, as promised, more questions and answers. We're going to go a little bit quicker through them. Sometimes those first questions get me fired up and I go into great detail. But the next question comes from Now It's Joey Bart Season, who says, where do the Giants turn to upgrade the bullpen? Easily the worst fall off from last year. So this is a question I've kind of received a lot and have been avoiding in some ways, only because I know the answer is not going to be satisfactory. So I think a lot of people think the way to address the bullpen is like to sign a bunch of free agents. And while they may sign a few here and there, let me remind you that in 2021, they did have the best bullpen ERA in the major leagues at 2.99. And the way that they built that pen was very similar to the way that they built their pen this year. And so, yes, it needs fixing, and yes, there needs to be some turnover. But the way that they built their pen that ended up being the best in the major leagues last year was kind of picking up players off waivers and through minor signings and guys with arbitration eligibility, guys with team control remaining, so that there's flexibility and you're not locked into guaranteed contracts that are expensive. I mean, they signed Jake McGee, they signed Jose Alvarez to kind of free agent deals. So I think that they'll probably make a couple of those types of moves. But in this way, I will point out that they kind of fixed their bullpen to some degree in the month of September. For example, the Scott Alexander acquisition. He was, I think, a minor league signing early in 2022, and he was rehabbing an injury and goes to the minor leagues and then comes up and performs. Shelby Miller, kind of a similar story. I don't remember if they signed him as a minor league free agent or if they claimed him off waivers. However it was a kind of minor transaction, and then Shelby Miller ended up being super impressive for the Giants. So I would anticipate more moves like that and smaller signings, and it may seem you may be like, no, they must go bigger. But the track record of bullpen arms, like whether you pick them up that way or you sign them to free agent deals, it's the same kind of volatility. And my understanding is that teams have like studied this. How are the best bullpens constructed? And it's often like from within. It's not that you go out there and sign a bunch of free agent bullpen arms, because they're so volatile. And if you give out these big contracts to bullpen arms and then they start to decline or they have a down season, as we saw, like plenty of guys for the Giants were like good last year and then not good this year, it can kind of wreck you in a lot of ways. Like think of Mark Melancon just as an example. Big free agent deal to a closer, and he just really changed like instantly. He was never the same guy with the San Francisco Giants. And so Shelby Miller, by the way, is a free agent, and he has expressed interest in coming back. So I would expect him to re-sign Shelby Miller because he was so good and he wants to return. He's a guy to look out for. And, Scott Alexander has another year of arbitration. Thomas Szapucki kind of impressed me at times since he was brought over in the Darin Ruf trade. And so they already started that turnover. Alex Young, throw him in the mix there. Andrew Vasquez was pretty impressive with his one relief appearance in the last game of the year. So these types of moves, I hate to say it, but don't be shocked if we see a lot of that to address the bullpen. Maybe one significant free agent signing, maybe two, but that's not going to be how they build their pen. Next question comes from Sora Lug, who says, where is money best spent? Judge, bullpen, starters, or beef up the farm system? So as I just mentioned, no, I don't think money best spent is on a bullpen because of the volatility. Starters, I don't think they need a ton of them. This is a big difference between last offseason and this offseason. Last offseason, Logan Webb was the only guy projected into that starting rotation who was under team control and was like under team control. They had to go out and fill out an entire starting rotation. And to their credit, they did a good job, ultimately. That starting rotation was a strength of the team. The defense didn't help them out, but definitely a strength of the team. And so Carlos Rodon will be a free agent. He'll opt out, and then they'll give him the qualifying offer, and he'll reject that, and then he'll be a free agent. And so I do think bringing in one starting pitcher, at least a significant arm, is certainly money well spent, and they need to do it. Or a trade. Could be Shohei Ohtani, could not. I mean, likely not, but it's a possibility in this crazy game. But I do think the money should be spent on bringing in at least one starter. I'm not entirely sure what you mean in terms of spending money to beef up the farm system, like taking on a bad contract. That's always a good idea, in my opinion. If some team is willing to give you young talent in exchange for taking on a bad contract, I think that they should be open to that. But ultimately, I think money is best spent this winter on position player impact talent. And that exists out there. You mentioned Judge. Sure, why not? I mean, the why not is that he's going to be 31 in year one of a deal. And so you're talking about 7-8 years. Really have to realize that you're talking about you're going to have him under a big contract for ages 35, 36, 37, 38. These are the years. It's easy now to get all wrapped up in excitement about the current talent of the player. But really, I mean, Evan Longoria was like on a Hall of Fame track when he was around Judge's age. And then he just hasn't been that kind of guy with the Giants. And I'm not saying it's a direct comparison. I think Judge is better now than Longoria was at this time. But Longoria was an excellent major league player. And then the Giants brought him in for this part of his career, the kind of 32 to 36 part of his career. And how has it gone? Not great. And a lot of Giants fans wish that they had never taken on Longoria in the first place. But so they got to be smart. They have to think about, they have to factor in the aging curves and pick the right guys. But position player, everyday talent is where the money is best spent this offseason, in my opinion. So the next question comes from Rick, who says, the Marlins were shopping starting pitching. Could the Giants trade for a starter and Jazz Chisholm? And Pablo Lopez, in parentheses here, one of the starting pitchers that they were known to be open to trading. So this is an interesting idea. I have addressed this question before, this pretty much exact question. And what I said at the time, and I'm going to say it again, is that the cost would be so great. And when I say cost, I mean prospect cost. To get Jazz Chisholm and Pablo Lopez, you're giving up like arguably both of Marco Luciano and Kyle Harrison. Okay, it's not going to be easy. And that's why a team like the Giants that is in a big market and has this flexible payroll situation, like I mentioned, I keep saying, even if they came in at their modest payroll that fans are not happy with, around 160 million, would still give them 60 million to spend on this year's on 2023 salaries. So I would prefer them to bring in their impact talent by writing checks as opposed to giving up elite young talent. And I get it. People say, well, Harrison and Luciano might be good. These guys are already good. And there's a good point to that. But what you're also giving up is years of control. And so with Lopez and Chisholm, I believe Chisholm has 3 years left of team control. Lopez might be 2 years left of team control. I don't have it pulled up. But it would be a hefty cost to bring in these players. Jazz Chisholm also, I think, had like a stress fracture in his back or something last year. So that's a factor as well. I don't think this is all that likely, but Farhan Zaidi did mention in a KNBR interview that sometimes, like I said, with free agents, is that it's not necessarily the best way to get younger and more athletic because you're signing guys by definition who have been around a while. And so, yeah, Jazz Chisholm is younger and more athletic. So it's not the craziest thing in the world. But maybe if you add in Pablo Lopez, the prospect capital cost becomes so great that I'm not sure it makes sense. But if just Jazz Chisholm was to become available, then certainly he's a guy who could make sense for the Giants. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to talk about openers. Are they going to keep doing this moving forward? We're going to talk about Evan Longoria. Are they going to bring him back? And Casey Schmidt, is he going to factor at the big league level next year and when? So we'll get to all of it momentarily. But first, all right, as promised, more questions and answers. The next one comes from Otis, who says, if they bring back Longoria, shouldn't they trade Davis? He's been good, but having both of them and Flores on the same roster seems like it's step one on the road to repeating the oops, all DHs lineup. I like that. Oops, all DHs. That's a tagline of 2022 for the San Francisco Giants. But, I mean, shouldn't they trade Davis if they bring back Longoria? So the first question is, will they bring back Longoria? We've kind of received mixed messages. Farhan Zaidi, he had the quote saying, there's certainly a role for Longoria on our roster. But what he then said was, the question is, what is the role? And made it clear that the role wouldn't be to rely heavily upon him. It would be to maybe have him as a guy off the bench who could pinch hit against a left-handed pitcher and maybe go in for defense. So I'm not sure that you can't have Longoria, Davis, and Flores on the same roster, but then David VR starts to complicate matters, because when you have the four of them on the roster at the same time, then yeah, Davis and Flores and VR kind of become that oops, too many DHs. But Longoria, I mean, he can play the field and play it well. So I don't know. The fact is they have flexibility. JD Davis is arbitration eligible. They could non-tender him if they wanted to. They could certainly explore trading him, but as we saw, I mean, the Mets, all they got in return for JD Davis plus 3 prospects was Darin Ruf. And so I'm not sure quite how much value Davis has. As good as he was at times with the bat with the Giants this year, he, isn't a great defender, as you're alluding to here. And there's a lot of swing and miss in his game. And yeah, I mean, it's just not an overall extremely valuable player. And I think that the offense he could provide to the Giants is potentially valuable. So I'd probably rather just hold on to him, and we'll see what happens with Longoria. But yeah, I mean, hopefully they don't back themselves into that same problem again with too many DHs. Carol says, will we see the end of the opener? And unfortunately, Carol, the answer is no. It's not going away for the Giants, and it's not going away in Major League Baseball unless there's some kind of rule change to prohibit it, but that would be hard to do because all you're doing is just taking out your starting pitcher after one inning. How can you make a rule against that, really? So I guess you could. There's probably ways to do it, and I just want to point out it is not only the Giants who are doing this. Every team, almost every team, does openers at some point at various times throughout the season. That being said, ideally you have 5, starting pitchers who go out there and throw 200 innings. But the reality is when a pitcher goes down with an injury or whatever, you're not just going to give that role to a minor leaguer who you figure might struggle when you have bullpen arms who are, if you look at the bullpen ERAs across baseball versus starting pitcher ERAs, bullpens are better. And so it's hard to argue with the logic behind it. I get that aesthetically it's not people's favorite, but they only did it so much towards the end of the year because they had guys go down with injuries, and they also didn't have obvious replacements in the upper minors. Like if you look at Sean Jelly and what his numbers were, they weren't great. And he's not a top prospect like Kyle Harrison. So this going into 2023, if there's an injury in the rotation, Farhan Zaidi has said we could see Kyle Harrison early in the season in 2023 in the major leagues. And so when you have arms that are ready to go in the upper minors, then those guys will get an opportunity to fill in that rotation. But if you don't have that, then we're going to see openers. And if you don't have like great starting pitching, you're going to see openers and bullpen games in certain spots. Like they weren't doing it for Rodon, right? If you have 5 Rodons, you're not doing it ever. But if you don't, you do it sometimes. And a lot of teams do. GMAC 2023 says, who do you think, GMAC 2023, who do you think that they can package with La Stella to get a decent return? So I don't think they should do this. So I'm not necessarily going to say who, because you'd have to package like a good young player to get a decent return. And so the Giants aren't in a position financially, even though they have so few commitments for 2023. La Stella is one of them, and it's a significant one at $11.5 million. But the Giants aren't one of these teams that needs to be like giving up talent in order to part with a bad contract. They should just be able to say, that contract, it's a sunk cost. He's not producing for us. We're going to move on. And so I don't think they need to get a decent return. What he could be used for is a exchanging of bad contracts for maybe a guy who fits the roster better, someone who's like a better defender, but also just has problems, but at least can provide something the Giants need right now in a bad contract exchange, or to just offset some money if you're taking on, a player like Ohtani. maybe you don't want to take on all 30 million and you can include La Stella. I don't think they should do that, because what it means for the Giants is that you're giving up more because the Angels would be taking on a bad contract. So they kind of just have to bite the bullet with this one. I think the idea of exchanging bad contracts may be the most attractive option if you're going to try to trade La Stella. But I definitely don't think they should add talent to La Stella just to get rid of the money. It is just 1 year, $11.5 million, but it's over after 2023. Last question comes from Deleted User, who says, how major of a role do you think Casey Schmidt could play in 2023, doing a deeper dive into his minor league numbers? So is that 2 questions? I think it's how big of a role will he play, and please do a deeper dive into his minor league numbers. So I think he could play a significant role, and the fact that he ended up in AAA is no small deal, because it means he's very likely to start in AAA for the Giants next year. Casey Schmidt is 23 years old. He'll turn 24 in March, and all he did was kind of hit at every minor league level. And oh, by the way, all he also did was play elite defense at third base. And so it could be, I mean, he literally, to me, could take over that third base position by the end of 2023. I think that would be the hope. It does, like, you think about the free agent shortstops. I keep thinking, I don't know, Carlos Correa. I could easily see him being able to play a good third base for the Giants, given the arm he has. I mean, it's just kind of, I could easily see that, because you have Brandon Crawford under contract. And if you do that, where does Schmidt fit in? And say Schmidt comes up and makes a good impression, what do? I mean, you could have Schmidt at third and Crawford at short and Correa at second. I don't know. Suddenly you'd have really good defenders all over your infield, and it would be exciting. So I think he could play a significant role. It'll be up to him. It'll be up to how he performs in AAA as to whether or not he'll get a shot in the major leagues. I would imagine if he just does decently well, he will get that shot. The bat doesn't even need to be great for him to be a really good player, because of how plus the defense is. I could do a deeper minor league dive on the minor league numbers. I think I've done this already. Basically, he hit well. The numbers are inflated in AA a little bit by a .432 average on balls in play, but it's above average power. It's a good amount of contact, strikeout rates in the low 20s instead of, certain guys, Joey Bart, when he was in the minors, striking out like close to 30% of the time, which you don't want to see. It's a little too much. Not a ton of walks out of Casey Schmidt in AA, but in high A, he did have an 11% walk rate, 17 homers in just 93 games. And the defense is just so good. So it's a very intriguing package, and we definitely could see him in 2023. We're probably going to see Kyle Harrison. So I think finally in 2023, some of these young players who could actually be impact players will start to make that impact at the major league level, or at least that's the hope if things go according to plan. But these guys are close, finally. So anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. Now make your second listen the Locked On MLB podcast. MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and unique perspective on every team and the biggest stories around the league. Follow the #1 daily league-wide podcast, Locked On MLB, on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please subscribe, hit the bell notification button, rate it, whatever you can do. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.